The consequence is, if those of you who are familiar have tracked any of this, is the dependency on natural gas coming from anywhere is problematic. And so one of the issues in all of this is, if the Russians decide, as they did with Western Europe, to cut off the oil for whatever reason, that means that the price of fuel for China is going to be astronomically high. It's also going to cause incredible tension and problems in the country of China, as well as other regions, and also obviously the clients of the Chinese manufacturing industry. The other thing that's being done in China is, along the coastal areas, they're putting in what are called liquefied natural gas plants, and having natural gas, which is liquefied or condensed, being shipped by various countries, to China to be used also for fuel for their system. The point I'm trying to make is, this is a fossil fuel solution. It's the second industrial revolution solution. There are a lot of people in China looking towards and solving the problem, looking at a third industrial revolution. And one of the key factors in which they're doing that, and one of the points of a third industrial revolution, is to have a policy and program. The United States does not have an energy policy. The state of California does not have an energy policy. There are programs and there are monies slated, and set up, if you will, for different regions or areas, but there's no overall program or strategy. The Chinese have what they call 5-year plans. They've just been through the 11th and are now working on the 12th 5-year plan. And what was interesting in the work I did with the Chinese is they had not defined in their last plan what the concept of sustainability meant. That's on the agenda for the next one. I would argue that's something that we need to do in this country in terms of the third industrial revolution. We need to define what sustainable development is, and then we have to be sure that we set our goals for it, our vision for it, and then how we're going to measure if we've done it correctly, if we've actually done something. And that hasn't been done. That's a challenge, I would argue, that we need to think about here in California, you need to think about in Silicon Valley, and the rest of the country, as well as the world, has to also address. You do have things similar to that in Europe, however. And you do have similar definitions of these terms also in Japan. So I want to point out, again, the third industrial revolution has taken place in other parts of the world, and we've got to play catch-up. And this issue of sustainability can be defined in this particular slide. You have, in other words, those of you who have got your degrees, undergraduate or otherwise, in XYZ discipline. The thing about sustainability is it's not one discipline. It's multiple disciplines. It's an area where you have to know something about economics, you need to know something about engineering, and you really need to know a little bit about psychology. I won't get into that. That's Therapy 101. Anyway, I'll tell a few jokes to be sure you're all paying attention here throughout this discussion. But the point I'm trying to make is very important, and that is that sustainability is really multidisciplinary. There are ways in which these different fields interact with one another, and what we're seeing is the change from, if you will, the MBA approach to having to do business in the future to what I refer to as a Master of Business in Sustainability. That's the challenge. What we have to do is look at these issues in a very interactive way, look at the problems, how the solutions are going to come, some from architect and design, some from water waste treatment plants and infrastructure, some others are going to come from construction, and others, of course, from economics as well as business. That's what sustainability is all about. It's an interaction between all of these areas, and what we have to do is get away from just looking at one particular area and see how they're all integrated with each other. Then this is just sort of a summary of what the third industrial revolution is all about. As I pointed out, it's renewable energy versus fossil fuels. I'm going to put in this category of renewable energy, by the way, things like sun, wind, solar, ocean power, geothermal, nanotechnologies that were just mentioned earlier during the presentation from my colleague from Finnegan. But the point is, it's all kinds of things that are using our resources, not destroying them, but using things that are actually here and available to us now. It doesn't include, and I'll underline this, and certainly again, take questions or comments about it, it does not include oil, natural gas, coal, you ready, nor nuclear power. And I will show, if you like to, some slides and information as to why that's the case. In other words, it's got to be things that we're looking at as a society on renewable energy sources that are available to all of us, that we are not destroying forest or land, but we're actually using because the sun is shining or whatever that is available. The other parts of the third industrial revolution are new technologies. There needs to be storage devices. We don't always have sun out or the wind is blowing. We also have to look at what are called smart grids, and I'll get into some examples of that. And then we also have to be very mindful of efficiency and conservation. Now, it's this last item, which is really the place to start, is we have to be more mindful, again, as Gene was pointing out, on what you do at your home or what you do in the office. We have to practice what we preach. But we also have to do things, too, in helping other people understand why this whole issue is important. So we have to conserve our use of energy. I mean, for example, how many of you in your own homes have low flush toilets? Great. Do some of you remember the day when we used to put bricks in the back of the toilet? Remember that? Few of you remember. Okay. Well, I'm old enough to remember. That's the way we're saving the flow of water. But now today, the technology is there to have low flush toilets. It's a very important issue because if we're not mindful of our use of water, whether you have more water here in Northern California versus what is in Southern California, it doesn't matter. We're all sharing this because we're on this planet together. This is one example of where some of the change has taken place. I had mentioned or showed this slide, I think, before. Some of you may remember it. But this is our second industrial revolution. This is a central power plant, power going by transmission lines to homes, to factories, and to office buildings. This is the second industrial revolution. And by the way, I might add, this is a slide also from The Economist. It was, I'll use the word borrowed from my book on agile energy systems that came out just before this did. But anyway, this particular slide shows how the third industrial revolution is going to be using wind and solar on buildings and homes, also in conjunction with automobiles and cars, and then having storage devices, as I was just talking about. It illustrates, in other words, the second industrial revolution is going to be around, but the reality of it is that we're going to see more people with solar panels on their homes. Here on this resort area, we should probably see well, maybe that's an idea. We should talk to the manager about this afterwards. Anyway, or report it to the corporate stockholders. But the point is to have solar available on our buildings. And this is something that we need to be very mindful of. There's probably a swimming pool or two here in this resort. You can use what is called heat tubes or solar thermal to be able to heat and cool, or particularly keep your pools warm, rather than electricity coming from a central grid. And in this day and age, we don't know what's the power source for that central grid is. It's primarily coal and fossil fuels, and I can go through the statistics, but very briefly, here in California, we do not have coal, but we do get coal or electricity from coal mines and power plants that are outside of California. Almost 60%, just shy of that, of our energy in the state is actually coming from natural gas these days. And if we get more and more dependent on that, we're going to be in serious trouble as a state in terms of our economy. So I'm just pointing out, this is the second industrial revolution. We need to move to the third, which is illustrated in this particular slide. And by the way, again, that book that I would just mention, that I did as a result of the work I was with Governor Davis and the energy crisis, it's called Agile Energy Systems, and it talks about some of these solutions in that particular book. And again, there's some information on the table outside. So in Europe, they've started the third industrial revolution. This is actually a slide about them talking about the hydrogen economy at a conference about 6 or 8 years ago. I was actually a participant in that conference and went and gave a paper about it. But you'll notice, in this case, they're talking about hydrogen coming from renewable sources, as you can see illustrated here, and how it could be used for transportation and infrastructure. This is another example of what's going on in Europe, in Brussels, in terms of what they're trying to look at as important areas in terms of finance and technology development. They have committed, as of a year and a half ago, I think it's about $3 trillion US equivalent to actually funding new technologies throughout Europe. And these are with companies in Europe as well as trying to promote the commercialization of the technology. So it's not just laboratory research. This is an example of how the Europeans are seeing the institutionalization of all of this in terms of percentages for renewable power throughout Europe over the next few years. And as you can see, it's a very dramatic increase in how much energy that they'll be getting. And I'll give you some examples.